everybody. My name is Corinne Lebrun, and I'm going to be talking today about the difference between Kundalini and Kundalini Yoga, discovering hidden treasure. And the treasure is going to be basically why we get them confused and why that's treasure. So I have been associated with the Emerging Sciences Foundation for, oh my gosh, I think it's about 8 years now. And I am really honored to present at this conference. Wow, we've definitely come a long way over the years. So also, I wanted to talk a little bit about my background. I am an author, a scholar. I'm working on my Ph.D. in psychology. I am also an artist, a consultant, and what I like to call as a spiritual explorer. I've had mystical experiences since I was a child. I've had Kundalini experiences. I've been very blessed and have wondered, how do these fit together scientifically? And that's something that's been driving me since I was a teenager. So a lot of this information comes from that filter, from those filters, which I just mentioned. So here we go. So first of all, Kundalini. There's so many different definitions on what is Kundalini, but sometimes you hear people say, oh yeah, Kundalini, I know what that is. And then the next thing they say is, I do Kundalini. I go to the 6 p.m. class at Sacred Earth Yoga. And so you have to wonder, like, why is there a difference in how people perceive what is Kundalini, what is Kundalini Yoga, and then again, what are the similarities and what are the differences, right? So let's take a look. So first of all, you probably gathered Kundalini does not equal Kundalini Yoga. It is more like Kundalini Yoga can ignite Kundalini. It can help refine Kundalini. It's more like it is one way to light a fire. So for example, you can light a fire with a flintstone. You can light a fire with a match, a lighter, the sun. There's so many different ways. So let's take a closer look. So Kundalini is the life force energy innate in every living thing. It is both an evolving biological and spiritual mechanism that expands our consciousness. And Kundalini Yoga, it's one of the many methods to awaken and refine that flow of energy in the body. It is the name of a system of yoga that was developed in India in the 12th century. And it also refers to a system of yoga, contemporary yoga, that was developed by Yogi Bhajan, developed in the 1970s. So also there are two different types of Kundalini yoga. They have similarities, but they're not exactly the same. And what is it? It's used to awaken and refine the flow. So let's take this a step further as to why we see Kundalini Yoga. Are they the same, different? What does it mean? So why are there issues with it sometimes? And if we take a look at this, this actually tells us a lot about our own spiritual path and also our path into scientific understanding of any topic, and especially of things that are around spiritual topics. So let's take another look here. Cognitive bias. So that's one thing we all have. We deliver data to our mind within the context of a story we've already told ourselves. So somebody might only have ever heard of Kundalini as associated with yoga, and therefore Kundalini is always Kundalini Yoga, right? They have no other framework for it. So it's a bias that we automatically have because we like to make shortcuts in our thinking, which is called heuristics. And so if someone hears the word Kundalini, then they think they already know what it means. Just like sometimes we might hear the word Kundalini and think we already know what it means, but we're going to take a look at that and we'll ask some questions about that. And then schemas, we have schemas, they're cognitive frameworks and concepts that help us organize and interpret information in the world. Now, looking at these things, cognitive bias, heuristics, schemas, our brain utilizes these tools because it has to. It's our job is to become aware of it as much as possible. So we have so much information coming at us more so than ever that our brains need to make sense of it, and we can't possibly hold all the information at once or even know what's true. We can't consciously focus on things. So we have to create these structures in order, to filter out what we need at the moment. So that's why these things happen to begin with. But if we don't examine them, what happens is we can become somewhat inflexible, and especially with the schemas that exist around spirituality, religion, or any topic that has been created around things we don't know that we yet hold dear to our heart. So it makes things a little challenging, especially if you're trying to look at them from a, more of a scientific, objective point of view to find out what's really going on and dig in. You have to find ways to step back. So what are some ways to do that? And this is what I think is really interesting, this next step. So, if we're inflexible, what are we missing out on? We actually don't even know, because we hit a roadblock of knowledge and then the exploration is over, right? Because we think we already know everything. So how do we deal with it? So one thing is critical thinking. Of course, we have the critical thinking skills. We hopefully start learning those when we're in grade school and high school, and we learn how to utilize them in even more depth as we continue our education at times, or just sometimes go through life. So we learn how to be more and more objective. But what I find really fascinating is, when you're doing spiritual practice, what is the point of spiritual practice? It is also to unlearn. It is to get rid of our bias, and so we can see the world as it really is. And one way to do that is meditation. And there are other methods as well, but let's focus on meditation here. And actually, there have been peer-reviewed studies that demonstrate that different types of meditation remove cognitive bias. And I find that fascinating. So it's like, we know this, if we're meditation practitioners, we know that that happens over time. But I think it's incredible how within our spiritual practice, we are learning to unwind our assumptions about the world and ourselves in order to see even our concept of spirituality very differently. And so we always have to release what we think we know in order to get to the next step. So let's take a look-see here. Move myself around the screen. So we all have to be spiritual explorers. Excuse me a second. There we go, need some water. We have to ask ourselves, no matter what we're looking at, especially, Kundalini, mystical experiences, radical spiritual awakenings, what are we missing? What information has not been touched yet? What has not been really brought to the forefront? And what are my own cognitive biases around the topic, especially around Kundalini? Like, what do I think I know what this is? And then realize, oh, maybe I actually didn't know. Maybe there's new information. What do I know based on my own personal experience? How does it line up with other people's? Am I reframing my own personal experience to make sense out of it because someone else said that's how it should be? I mean, these things are really important. They be kind of scary sometimes, but it's really important in order to stay connected to our own truth and then really uncover the gems, the hidden treasures here. And then there's this whole piece of, what I don't know that I don't know that I actually don't know. We're going to get back to that sentence because it can be really confusing. I had some fun with it, but it can be confusing. But sometimes we just don't know the things that we don't understand yet because we have no context. But that's always why we have to be the explorer, right? So Kundalini energy, what do we know about this? Aside from the definition we had before. And if we just take everything, pretend we don't know anything at all about this, right? Say, it's felt energy in the body. So someone on the panel recently did a study, and I liked their definitions of spiritual awakening experiences and Kundalini experiences, and the difference being whether the energy is felt in the body. I thought that was a wonderful way to look at things. So when people have a Kundalini awakening, they feel energy moving through their body and many other things, which I don't have time to get into here, but that's the primary thing we're going to look at. So what do we know? This is really, when I took a look at this, like, what do we really know about the knowledge we have about Kundalini and where it came from? So we have, it was spoken about in the 5th and 6th century AD in the yogic and tantric scriptures of India. It associates Kundalini with the chakras, and it lays dormant in the spine. In Taoism, Qi and the awakening of Qi, it is discussed in a text called The Secret of the Golden Flower, where it's mentioned that is in the Dantian. I've heard different schools of thought give the Dantian, the lower Dantian, even different locations, but I'm certainly not an expert in that field. Also Buddhism, having the center of the Qi, be located in the Hara. And so where is that? And with them, it is actually around the solar plexus. So, but if you look back in the documentation, we really don't have a lot of information except for this. This is what we're going on these days, and we're building on this information. So same thing with, let's take a look at that's what we think, that's where our knowledge came from with Kundalini. We've built on all of that. We're going to get to another piece of that. We're going to weave this all together. So the next piece here is Kundalini Yoga. Where did this come from? As we talked about before, briefly in our definition of Kundalini Yoga, one system was brought by Yogi Bhajan. He's a contemporary teacher of this school. And his version of Kundalini Yoga was a mix of the Kundalini from India, as well as Raj Yoga, Laya Yoga, and perhaps a couple more. But it was a system that was put together to create best practices. So contemporary, very interesting, right? And then who knew, right? Carl Jung. He was the first person to study Kundalini Yoga, but his study of Kundalini Yoga was the Kundalini Yoga that was from India, from the 12th, that originated from the 12th century. Very fascinating. This was the first time it was presented here in the United States. And it was 1932 where he actually gave a talk at the Psychological Yoga Club. And I loved reading again about this history. And in 1932, no one ever even knew what was happening in India. And it was an unknown exotic system that was so fascinating that he was able to tie together and said, look, I think that there are correlations between these things called chakras and individuation, the process that he believed all of us humans go through in order to become a fully realized human being. So he really saw parallels between them. And apparently during this time, from what I was reading, I thought it was really humorous that psychology students were really bored. I guess they studied with Freud and didn't have a whole lot of other things to go on. And this just brought new life to the field. And it was really quite interesting. They finally had something to really look at and to finally look at not just the conscious, but the unconscious, and to find out how the unconscious can show itself within the chakra system, which they were just learning about. It's just so fascinating. There's so much information here. It's kind of when I'm stumbling about it in my head. I just would love to have time to share everything with you. But if you're interested, and if you can also reach out to me as well, but this is where you will find these sources. Jung and Kundalini, it's in the Journal of Analytical Psychology. They talk about it there, and his discussions on the topic, and his, on individuation, the chakras. Of course, no one ever heard about those things before he came along. And then also the psychology of Kundalini Yoga and notes of his seminars in 1932. It's well worth reading all this because you really start to see the history of the context we have around the phenomenon of Kundalini and the chakra system and how we relate the information that came from the East, from the Eastern lens of thinking, and how we translate it in Western society. So it really gives you an idea of the history of why we believe what we do. So we, again, created a framework around things, and especially around radical spiritual experiences. In order to understand them, we framed them around Jung's understanding. So it's very fascinating and well worth going into this to understand the roots of it all. So let's talk here a moment about the known activation methods. So we have Carl Jung talked about this, same with Yogi Bhajan, Kundalini Yoga. What they talked about was there is this energy, and if you refine it, you can become a fully actualized human being. Okay, that's all I'm going to say because there's more to it, but that's the piece they said. And so, but we also know from our research and from doing qualitative studies, interviewing different people, and also just listening to people's stories. And now we see so many of them with social media. We are all able to come together because we have this wonderful tool of technology that connects us, right? So anyway, ways that it can be activated. We've got Kundalini Yoga, Kriya Yoga, Saha Yoga. There are other Eastern systems and modern methods because there are teachers that can teach you how to activate the energy through specific meditation techniques and through specific breathing techniques. So that's like an active way to seek to awaken the energy. And then another way is through transmission. This is where someone's energy is already awake. You go to them and then they can awaken the energy in you. This can happen with Shaktipat from gurus or from healers or anyone else who is activated. And then also there's another method, which is the receiving method, which is surrender to the divine, turning things over to a higher power, and then also spontaneous spiritual awakenings. They happen and nobody at this point has an explanation as to why. They just happen for unknown reasons at this point. Of course, there are all different types of theories that could go into looking at things with a framework of karma as described in the Eastern philosophies. And perhaps that is why sometimes people's Kundalini awakens in their lifetime, in this current lifetime. But there are many different reasons that this can happen, and we just don't have the answers yet. So let's take a look here. So it's going to get back to Kundalini Yoga and what it does. So Kundalini Yoga, I put the IKYA, which is the International Kundalini Yoga Association Yoga, which is also where the Yogi Bhajan Yoga, Kundalini Yoga, that is, his teachings were a part of this system. I also studied to be a Kundalini Yoga teacher as well in this system, I should probably mention. So what does it do? It gives you the tools to heal your body. It smooths out Kundalini energy and also creates a gradual activation process. Now, for me personally, this was really wonderful because I was in the middle of a Kundalini awakening experience where having the energy move through my body was extremely uncomfortable. And I really needed to find something that would help me, let's call it, even it out. And for me personally, it was very helpful. But when I even did the teacher training, I noticed there were things missing. And this is what I'm talking about with being a spiritual explorer, looking for the gaps, looking for the things we find that are missing, even within the yogic teachings. So what's missing? This is really cool. I think it's so interesting. What's missing is that there's no discussion of bliss states. Like, where does it lead to? What does it do? Why do we have them? You know, good question, right? Are we supposed to go around healing everybody when that happens? Are we supposed to stay in them? I mean, there are all kinds of questions here. Just energy feelings. When you have energy moving through your body, whether it feels like fire, which is not so comfortable, or whether it feels like bliss energy, or just simply more prana. there's no discussion of this. So that's what's interesting. There's zero information on this in any of the ancient literature or in the Kundalini yoga systems as of yet. Physical sensations, some people might even feel, air blowing on their sixth chakra, that type of thing. Access to higher states of consciousness and activating psychic abilities. So this is what's in the gap. So let's take a look at the next slide I have put together here. Oh yeah, I love this one. This is where, like, the blind men touching the elephant. It's like we're seeing different pieces of what this Kundalini is and the Kundalini yoga that's developed. But for each one of us, we're like, we had one of the blind men in the front. Oh, he says, this feels like a tree. And then, somebody at the end feels like this is a piece of rope and he's on the elephant's tail. And then someone on the side is like, no, this actually feels like it's a smooth surface. So we're really looking at this phenomenon in a way through all these different lenses where we really need to take a step back. And perhaps we don't have the tools yet to fully take a step back, right? But anyway, finding hidden treasure in the gap. So this is the gap where the information, where the doorways are. This is the door to the next step of knowledge. So let's take a little look at the steps to finding new knowledge in the gap. So first, we acknowledge what we know, things we know for sure, and the things we think we understand. And then we say we think we understand this, but we might be making some assumptions about what we believe is true. And then we can acknowledge what knowledge we are seeking. Okay, so for example, in this case, we are seeking more information on bliss states, feelings of energy, higher states of consciousness, and activating psychic abilities, for example. We want to know more information about these things. And then there are things we are aware of, we are unaware of entirely. We don't even know to ask the questions yet. So for example, let's say you get to the bliss states and then you start to understand them, we might be able to then unlock the next question. That's my point here, right? Because what we're doing is we are taking these sacred practices, sacred experiences, and we are trying to break them down with scientific measurement. And we have to really build on our knowledge with some thought and consideration and even contemplation to get to the next point, especially with subjects like this. So things to think about, even in our own personal lives, when it comes to, if you've even had a Kundalini experience, you have to ask yourself, everything I think I'm learning about what this means and what it does. What lens am I really looking at this through? Or as a scholar, what lens are we looking at this through? As a spiritual explorer, is it Carl Jung's influence? Is it the ancient Indian texts, Chinese texts, contemporary paradigms? For example, what I mean by that is there are a lot of new age paradigms, or schools of thought that frame things in a certain way. And, we have to find out, even are those true, right? Qualitative research, is it through, scientific research of doing interviews, or is it through our own personal experience? So realizing there's a lens, because each lens, like I have here in the nice picture here, creates a prism. It's like we have to understand that no matter what, we're going to be looking at things through a filter. And to get to the next step of knowledge, to really see the gap, we need to understand that we are looking at things through a filter. I'm just going to quickly go through this because we don't have a lot of time, and I know other people will be talking about this as well. So some of the future directions with research around this topic, with Kundalini itself, we have, biofield measurement, wonderful thing, you can measure our biofield. Deliberate Kundalini activation in order to measure the biofield and see what's happening, and even take blood samples, for example. Measure bliss states compared with delta, theta, gamma waves. What does that look like? What do they compare to? Even taking a look at new cultural and religious frames around the phenomenon of Kundalini, because if we pause for a moment, we think about, we didn't know what we were looking for in these old texts before. we kind of did. Like, we can see a little bit of stuff. It looks like there might be some talk about Kundalini in the ancient Egyptian text. We're not 100% sure, but we can attribute it possibly, right? But now that we're really getting to be more clear, there are probably some ancient texts about these, especially ancient cultures, that have not been digitized yet, that we need to go back to find the information that now that we know what we're looking for, right? Let's see, now we know where we can go back. Also, research into psychic phenomenon, which is the result of Kundalini energy activation expansions, and also with creativity itself and Kundalini, because you hear so often of people becoming Kundalini activated and then suddenly their creativity just blossoms like crazy, you know? So what are these things all about? To ask the questions is very exciting. So the things I want to just really drive home here and talk about, you know, we talked about Kundalini, Kundalini yoga. Now we understand the differences. Why were there misconceptions to begin with the two? And why did we even possibly believe there was only one kind of Kundalini yoga? Because we didn't have the information. So with anything that comes to specifically this topic, to keep beginner's mind. Now we hear it all the time. And I'm actually leaving you a little breadcrumb here with someone reading a book with a blindfold. So I've actually seen footage of people with active Kundalini being able to do this. Fascinating stuff, and actually supposedly verified information. I was not there, I don't know for sure, but you hear of these things being superhuman abilities, which are innate in every single one of us. We just have to know how to cultivate them, that's all. Because as we know, so much information has been lost over time about our true human capacities. But anyway, to keep beginner's mind is how we're going to get there again, but we got to keep beginner's mind. Because Kundalini, in my opinion, really is just opens the door to the possibilities. I mean, I heard the stories, oh, once you're Kundalini awakened, you will become enlightened. It's like, no, it is just the door. Once you start feeling Kundalini, that is when the doorway really opens up and you can see what's on the other side. And there's a lot more work to do, but it's so much fun and it's full of mazes, and it is just the beginning. So we want to get to the beginning and understand how to walk through the beginning without any preconceived notions about it, and really walk as clearly as we can. So anyway, walk forward as clearly as we can. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed my little talk on Kundalini and Kundalini yoga today. And please reach out if you have any questions at all. This is how you can reach me. info@uplevelninja.com, because info is a lot easier than trying to type out my name, Corinne. And uplevelninja.academy is, I actually put some courses up on just education about Kundalini activation, what happens during the process. I have walk people through that with some scientific information as well. It's not just experiential. It's tying the two together so people can really become empowered in the journey, and a few other things that are there as well. So anyway, it's been wonderful to be here today, and thank you.